Well, we're back again, and I'm yet to realise why I refer to myself with the royal we in these video openings. Anyway, in this no fluff analysis, I'll be going over the water spirals released on the 3rd of July 2020 UTC. 6 characters were given spirals: Xander, Lily, Karina, Luther, Zardin, and Ricardt. Besides the general might, maximum level, and standard attack boost given from spiral nodes, there are 5 changes to each character as you unlock the spiral. I'll cover each of them, starting with Xander. Xander's first skill is Majestic Tide, which before dealt one hit of 825% with the sort of skill boost from additional buffs. It now deals 832% and inflicts frostbite for 21 seconds, dealing an additional 300-ish% damage. This addition of 300% damage from the frostbite is fairly consistent within the characters that have received spirals, so I'm not going to be repeating this additional 300% damage thing. I'll just mention that it inflicts frostbite. As an aside, it also received a 1k increase in the shared SP cost. Now Majestic Tide grants stacks of Born Ruler, which can stack up to 2 times. Stacks of Born Ruler are consumed by using a 4-strike or by using Majestic Tide with 2 stacks of Born Ruler. Born Ruler 4-strikes deal 3 hits, gain range, but each individual hit deals a bit under half of the overdrive damage. With 2 stacks, it also gains 30% Frostbite Punisher. Majestic Tide with 2 stacks of Born Ruler deals 840% damage. This does not take into account the skill boost from having buffs on Xander. The sim seems to suggest that you're best off using your Born Ruler stacks on upgrading the 4-strike once you have 2 stacks of Born Ruler. So this means that you'll want to avoid using 4 strikes until you have 2 stacks to consume. Xander's second skill, Royal Maelstrom, goes from 3 hits of 248% to 3 hits of 253%, and it now gains the plus 5% skill damage per buff on Xander. Xander's Striker's strength is now Born Ruler, which grants an additional 5% strength when the Born Ruler buff is active. His stun resist becomes Potent Stun Resist, and his 4-strike damage ability of 50% goes to 55%. On paper, these changes look pretty weak, and the simulator seems to suggest the same. However, the simulator doesn't really take co-op play into account. For example, current Ayaha and Otaha teams running a water composition will generally run a Gala Elisanne. Xander gains a huge amount of damage from her buffs, double dipping from her strength buff, and essentially quadruple dipping from her Celestial Ascent buffs. I've already seen sub 2 minute clears with the new Xander and Karina, which goes to show that the simulator's environment is especially unfriendly to team reliant adventurers. Make way for the king. The second adventurer receiving a spiral in this update is Lily. Lily's first skill, Glacial Blossom, went from dealing 2 hits of 484% damage and 120% chance to freeze, to dealing 2 hits of 529% of damage, and now the first hit has a 200% chance of inflicting freeze, while the second hit can inflict frostbite with a 120% chance. For those confused about status affliction percentages, you subtract the enemy's resistance chance from the affliction chance and then calculate on the remaining percentage. At 200% chance to inflict, it means that Lily is guaranteed to freeze the enemy unless they are 100% immune to freeze. Lily's second skill, Frozen Gale, initially dealt 1 hit of 974%. With the spiral update, it now deals 1 hit of 1070% and grants Lily the Crystallian Princess buff for 30 seconds. This buffs Lily's standard attacks and grants them Frostbite Punisher, as well as increasing the radius of Frozen Gale to the same range as Wand basic attacks. The buff does not stack, but the 30-second timer is reset upon recasting Frozen Gale. Lily's full HP equals strength ability went from 15 to 20%, Burn Resist is now Potent Burn Resist, and her previous 100% skill prep is now Skill Prep and Skill Charge, meaning that skills now charge her skill gauges by 5%. This is akin to about 5.2% skill haste, assuming no other sources of skill haste. Lily's number boosts look a bit bigger than Xander's, but her damage mechanics are a lot simpler overall. The simulator seems to suggest that Lily does more damage if she only uses her Glacial Blossom to apply Frostbite on a non-frostbitten enemy, which seems to point out that it doesn't really deal enough damage to justify using on cooldown. In my opinion, however, the ability to freeze essentially on demand is incredibly strong against Ayaha Notaha. This means that the boss will rarely be able to stack their strength buff, and the intermittent freezing will also increase the team's uptime through skipping or ignoring mechanics in the fight. Next up, we have some 4-star adventurers gaining spirals. We have the first one, Karina. Karina's first skill, Raging Tide, initially dealt 2 hits of 543% damage, and it also had the skill boost effect from buffs. It now deals 2 hits of 545% damage, as long as a skill boost, as well as inflicting frostbite. It's also seen a roughly 1000 SP cost increase when used as a shared skill. Karina's second skill is Black Flag, which dealt 4 hits of 257% damage. This is now 4 hits of 260% damage, but it also buffs her defense by 30% for 30 seconds. Karina's healing double buff has gone from 3% regen for 20 seconds to 4% regen for 25 seconds. Her stun resist is now potent stun resist, and her 50% skill prep has now become 100% skill prep and skill charge akin to Lily. So Karina's had some fairly basic changes, however these minor changes have had a major effect on her standing on the sim. Depending on affliction sources, Karina is now rated 3rd to 4th in personal DPS in the water element. Not to mention that the sim doesn't really account for the huge bonuses that Karina would get from team buffs. Black Flag essentially grants Karina 10% skill damage on Raging Tide, and the buff to her healing double buff really makes me think that she has the potential to become a juggernaut that simply eats Ayaha Notaha's stunning attacks for extra uptime. It really wouldn't surprise me after these spirals if Karina and Xander became top DPS in practice. Next up we have the 4-star adventurer Luther gaining a spiral. Luther's first skill, Legato Step, went from dealing 4 hits of 186% to dealing 4 hits of 253% and inflicting frostbite. However, it's also seen a roughly 3000 point increase to shared SP cost, which is over 50%. Luther's second skill, Terpsichore, used to deal 4 hits of 144% damage with a 90% chance of inflicting a 5% strength debuff for 10 seconds, and a 30% chance of inflicting a 5% defense debuff for 10 seconds. Now it deals 4 hits of 206% damage, and also has a 100% and 50% chance of inflicting strength and defense debuffs respectively. Luther's Flurry Devastation has gone from 10% crit rate to 15% crit rate, his stun resist is now potent stun resist, and Striker's strength has become Passionate Dancer, increasing the strength bonus per stack from 4 to 6%, and activating the Passionate Dancer buff whenever one of Luther's hits is a critical hit. This allows Luther to apply Frostbite with his 4 strikes, consuming the buff, and the effect has a 10-second cooldown upon activation. This is a fairly basic upgrade overall. His game plan is uncomplicated, with the addition of Frostbite on 4 strikes, but his overall boosted DPS doesn't really break any records. It would have been nice to see some additional boost to his damage on frostbitten enemies akin to Vice and poisoned enemies, but I guess Cygames doesn't really want to bring water to shadow levels of affliction synergy. And now we move on to the 3 stars receiving spirals, the first of which is Zardin. Zardin's first skill, Zardin Blade, used to simply deal 1 hit of 682% damage. It now deals 1 hit of 701% damage, and also inflicts Frostbite. There's been a 1.5k increase to shared SP cost, which is roughly a 33% increase. Zardin's second skill, Zardin's Wrath, used to deal 1 hit of 614%. It now deals 1 hit of 750% alongside inflicting Frostbite. Zardin's full HP equals strength ability has gone from 10% to 20%, and his 75% burn resist over 2 abilities has now combined to 100% potent burn resist. This is an even more basic upgrade than Luther. This brings Zardin up to roughly Catherine levels of personal DPS, however, so I think it's a decent buff overall. I don't think there's too much more to be said. Last, but actually, yeah, maybe least, we have Ricardt, the 3-star water staff. Ricardt's first skill, Measure of Mercy, used to simply heal for 108% recovery potency. It's now been bumped up to 130% and also cleansing burn. However, it's seen a roughly 3k increase to shared SP cost, or about 40%. Ricardt's second skill, Holy Water, was a 36% potency heal with 29% potency regen for 15 seconds. This has now been bumped up to 44% initial heal with a 35% regen for 15 seconds. Ricardt's first ability of full HP equals 20% defense has now become full HP equals 20% defense and 10% recovery potency. Ricart's 75% stun resist over 2 abilities is now 100% potent stun resist. This is mostly a numbers buff, but the addition of Burn Cleanse enables Ricardt to occupy a unique niche. Of all the water healers, Ricardt is the only one that cleanses the affliction that he's vulnerable to. However, his potent stun resist still won't do much for him against Hydra and Hilda. Sure, this buff makes Ricardt more viable in Ayaha and Otaha, but most compositions would rather have a Gala Elisanne doing the healing instead. However, Measure of Mercy costs less to share than Thaniel and Zhang Ziya's burn cleansing heals, and heals for more, with the trade-off of costing more SP to charge. Overall, I think these are decent spirals. While the damage potencies haven't increased by a huge amount, the addition of Frostbite to many abilities adds viability to these adventurers, and Xander and Karina should perform much better in practice than they do on the Mushymato DPS sim. At the very least, no SP costs were increased like Halloween Elisanne, and the spirals have brought up some older adventurers closer to the power level of newer ones. And I reckon that was their intended purpose, so long as we ignore spirals like Marth. All in all, thank you very much for watching. Consider dropping a like or even subscribing if you'd like to see more of this content. Stay safe, take it easy, and I'll see you all next time.